locked in.
Look at what we have here, folks.
To the only show that matters.
The cream of the crop.
Duke loves wrestling.
And there is no one that does it better than
your host.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass.
The Duke.
And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Hey, it's Brad Shepard, the Brad Shepard from ProSportsExtra.com. Maybe the most hated person in all of wrestling Twitter. I also have a podcast, the Oh You Didn't Know Wrestling Show, available on iHeartRadio and pretty much everywhere podcasts are available. And I have a Patreon, patreon.com/OYDKWS. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure you're familiar with me, but if you're not, I think you'll find this very enlightening.
Listen, Brad Shepard, legitimately public enemy number one in the pro wrestling industry here. I'm sure all the ham and eggers, they're going to call the FBI. They're going to call the CIA. They may even call Space Force to have the Duke Loves Wrestling podcast taken off the air because I dare bring on the guy that they can't stand the most, Brad Shepard, onto the show. What do you think about that?
It's quite possible because I do get a lot of cancel Brad Shepard. There was a movement on Twitter for that where I think I was trending. And so, a lot of people try to get me fired from Pro Sports Extra as well. So those are type of things like, unfortunately that I'm used to. And I really don't care. So, it doesn't matter.
If there's one thing that you have made clear is that you don't care. You're unbothered by this. And in fact, I would dare say you're amused by all of the crazy ire and things like that. In fact, you just put out an article that I read and got a kick out of where you talked about your top love letters, so to speak, things that people have sent to you where they think that their threats and their nasty tweets and messages to you are really gonna give you a zing there, and you don't seem to care too much, huh?
No, I don't really care at all. I mean, everybody has an opinion, obviously, but I have thick skin, and you have to do what I do. But at the end of the day, it's just someone on Twitter who is obsessed with me or spending a lot of their free time thinking about me and tweeting about me. And so it's kind of amusing how they've put me on this pedestal in their mind over something so silly like professional wrestling, something that's essentially just entertainment. And in some cases, it works them into a shoot, so to speak.
You're a military guy. So, you went through the training and what have you. I'm not going to ask you specifically where you were stationed or anything like that, but you made it through, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. That's where I did my basic combat training, in the Army. And I went to Fort Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. That's where I did my AIT. I was a chemical equipment repair, which is a 63 Juliet. And that was very long. That was like 17 weeks. So yeah, I mean, I know there are conspiracies running around that I'm a fake stolen valor soldier or something to that effect. But I hate to tell people, I was in the Army for 6 years. I was honorably discharged as an E4 specialist. They wanted me to stay longer. They wanted to promote me to an E5, a sergeant. And I was ready to leave the military instead.
After a serious experience like that, where you literally have seen it all, does this whole keyboard warrior stuff, these wrestling fans who think that they can threaten you online or challenge you to beat you up the next time they see you at a show, does any of that stuff move you at all?
For the most part, no. I mean, it's really easy for people to be tough online. I think you see a lot of that. And, at the end of the day, talk is cheap, but when you see someone in person, especially someone like me, I'm the size of a large wrestler. So, it's very easy to say those type of things until you see me in person and you realize here's a guy with, really just a self-defense / martial arts fighting background who's just this large 6'6" man. And so it's very easy to pop off those things on Twitter. It would be a whole different story for probably a lot of them in person. So you can't really take a lot of that seriously. I mean, people get so worked up into a shoot. And I think that's just the thing we see in society today. But, you have to keep those things in mind just for safety reasons. You never know. But at the end of the day, just the typical message of those type of things doesn't bother me.
What is it about pro wrestling news and really pro wrestling journalism that's holding it back? Because I'll tell you right now, man, it's as if the majority of the industry, they don't want to step on the toes of the vocal minority out there for fear that they're going to, cuss them and threaten them and do all the things that are being done to you on a daily basis. What is it about journalism that really needs to change in order for it to be on a higher level like other sports or general news and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's really a couple of components to that. One is the professional wrestling companies themselves have to allow for better access. There's this sort of carny aspect to it, in particular with like a WWE, for example, where they don't allow a lot of access and everything is a blur between real and make-believe. So it's just a very odd situation to begin with. But, by the same token, you see who they have in the wrestling journalism industry, and would you really be that open to giving them access when you see essentially what they have are glorified fanboys? It's not really an ideal situation on either end. So I think you need more transparency and access from like a WWE and the other wrestling companies. But on the journalism end, you need a complete overhaul. I mean, it's just even the people who do it full time, they're really just essentially fanboys. Even if they do have a journalism degree, it's very obvious that, again, they're not looking at it objectively like a sports journalist, for example. They're looking at it from a fanboy perspective. And, it's just something that needs to completely be overhauled. There's a lot of agendas and a lot of echo chambers of thought and opinions where it's not considered politically correct to step outside of that, to be totally transparent and honest. Or, if a story perhaps is too controversial, to stay away from it and be afraid to report on it. Well, that's exactly what journalists should be doing, is reporting on the most controversial, important stories. They should be more worried about reporting on the WWE Saudi Arabia travel situation than Samoa Joe getting a push on Monday Night Raw. It's kind of ridiculous to me. So I think there's a couple of components to it, but it's in a really, really bad state all around.
It's funny that you say that, because I was talking to a friend of mine who's part of the business, and it was a random night, and they said, that Brad Shepard, he said something about Sasha Banks, and I'm fed up with him. I'm gonna straighten him out. And I'm like, what are you gonna say to the guy that's gonna upset this guy? He's a military guy. He's taken on the world, and he hasn't stopped yet. What do you think you're going to say to this guy that is going to be the one thing that's going to really get him? Just leave him alone. But it brings up a good point, though. Sasha Banks. At one point, that was the biggest story going. She went through WrestleMania. She and Bayley dropped the tag team championships, and then she essentially disappeared. You were on top of that story, and you reported a bunch of things. And, indirectly, she essentially called you out. And the fans kind of took exception to some of your reporting and what have you. What was the whole story from your perspective on that? Looking back on it now, did you have sources that may have not given you accurate information, or do you continue to stand behind what you had reported at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I continue to stand by it. The situation evolved, and of course, Ryan Satin was the one who reported about the crying on the floor. And sometimes that kind of gets put onto me when that's not accurate. So it was actually Fox Sports' own Ryan Satin who was falsely reporting that, and he did subsequently apologize, is my understanding, after he got the Fox Sports job. But, situations like that evolve in real time very fast. And, I'm not connected into WWE or any professional wrestling company 24/7. I don't do this for a living. I could if I wanted to. I just don't have a desire to. So it's not like I'm constantly connected into everything about WWE. So that's a disadvantage I naturally have. But, the situations do evolve. And it's very easy to report on something after the fact. Like Dave Meltzer is a guy who doesn't do a lot of news information over social media. He's the guy who goes after the fact and talks about it on, to his paid subscribers on Wrestling Observer Radio. And so it's very easy to do that and say, this is why they did this, or this is what they're going to do after the fact, rather than in real time saying something as it evolves. So, you're really putting yourself out there when you do that. And I don't have a problem doing that because I'm confident in my information. But things evolve in WWE, especially, as time goes on. That's just the reality. I can't change that. I'm just reporting the information. That's all I can do. So, I knew when Sasha Banks returned. And people say, oh, well, she was going to return before. Well, yeah, but I don't control that. There could have been a million circumstances where there was a conversation about her return. It was going to happen. They held off. They decided to do it a different time, etc. I don't control those things. I'm just passing along the information. And I think when you look at my track record, I've gotten a lot of big stories right that literally no wrestling journalist has gotten. So, there's got to be some credibility there, whether you like me or not. And, at the end of the day, if I have evidence that something I said was wrong, let me know and I'll correct the record. But, until then, yeah, I stand by what I said.
You brought them up, and you certainly have definitely caught the attention of the folks over at Fox. In fact, the SmackDown on WWE Twitter account, they've had a couple of exchanges with you. What's your take on that, man? I mean, it's pretty unusual for a network's Twitter account to zero in on a journalist who is not one of their journalists, by the way, and just talk nonsense to them. What do you think about that?
I thought that was kind of comical. Of course, one of the references I made reference to, of course, in my article, the 2019 love story of wrestling Twitter and Brad Shepard, is where the Fox Sports, Fox on WWE accounts had mentioned a tweet I made, which was, my sleeper pick is Becky Lynch because when she's picked, it's going to put me to sleep. and so they responded saying, well, if a WWE insider, in quotes, says it in his bio and everything, says so, then it's over for the man. Now, I don't just say that, but by the way, maybe that person, they should do a little research because I appeared on Fox Sports Radio as a WWE insider before. Right, so if they did even the most basic research, they would understand that's a literal fact. So they're kind of embarrassing themselves in a way without realizing it. But, I think it doesn't matter to me. It's great for me. It's great for spreading my brand. But they're doing my job for me. So I hope they continue to do that. But if I were them, I would absolutely not be doing that. That's the opposite of what they should be doing. In fact, they should be more worried about promoting a show where the ratings are in the tank. I mean, they should be more focused on promoting SmackDown and doing a better job of that than singling me out and, frankly, putting me over to their entire audience. But I appreciate it, though.
Yeah, and that's a Fox deal, not so much a WWE deal, but it's definitely the complete opposite of what we know of WWE, which is ignore the competition, ignore anybody who's not part of their family, act like it doesn't exist. They're not in our universe, so to speak. Because as you said, they're just giving you recognition and shine. I'm sure a lot of folks, if they weren't aware of you before, they certainly were after that. So, thank you to whomever's running that Fox account. Good job there. You may have to send them a bottle of wine or something there, Brad. I don't know. Another name, and this is a name that is brought up, compared and contrasted to yours on a constant basis. And you said his name, Dave Meltzer.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's been covering pro wrestling. I just turned 37 years old. He's been covering wrestling about as long as I've been alive. the past few years, I don't know what's been going on with him, but it just seems like whatever's happening in the WWE is the end of the world. And if you're New Japan or, you know, the new kid on the block, AEW, then everything is fine, which is very strange to me. You know, I like my news to be a little bit more well-rounded. You know, if somebody is just focusing on something and saying it's bad and then saying something else is good, I instantly question it.
Sure.
But Dave doesn't seem to have much love for you, neither he nor his fans. So let me ask you directly. Do you have a relationship with Dave Meltzer, number one? And number two, what's the story with you two just in general? I mean, you know, did you steal his girlfriend, or, you know, does he not like your cologne? Like, what the hell's going on there?
Yeah, so I guess I'll take it back to the beginning when, you know, I first broke the story of the XFL return. And when I did that, it, of course, made international news. And that's the first time that Dave Meltzer, that I know of, officially credited me in his Wrestling Observer newsletter. Now, fast forward, by the way, a few years later, and he's telling people that I'm a troll, that I don't have any sources in WWE, and to ignore me. He completely discredits me to his audience. Again, he himself used me in his Wrestling Observer newsletter, but, you know, essentially, Dave, once I started getting big story after big story, you know, I had the XFL, I had the WrestleMania location, I had the Hall of Fame class in advance, you know, and just things like that, time after time. He eventually stopped crediting me. And he actually started stealing some of my stories without crediting me. And he started discrediting me to his audience. So basically, he got threatened, in my opinion, by, you know, the work that I was doing. These guys are very protective of their spot, and I'm not sure everybody understands that. Them meaning the wrestling journalists. And they don't want outsiders coming in and stealing their spot, and that includes Dave. Dave likes being the authority on professional wrestling. And Dave makes his income by being that so-called authority. Well, as we've seen over the years here recently, that's really been exposed as bullshit. You know, Dave's sources have dried up, you know, drier than the Sahara Desert. He's probably had his worst year ever in 2019. Just multiple stories wrong, just making a complete horse's ass out of himself time after time. So, you know, it just kind of evolved from there. Like, I was getting a lot of stories right. He started crediting me, and then they didn't like the attention I was getting. I was going on, you know, ESPN radio and Fox Sports Radio. I was doing all these big things that those guys weren't doing, and that's when it became an issue. And that's when they turned the tide and tried to start discrediting me. And, you know, I've been dealing with it ever since. They'll steal my stories and run them in the dirt sheets without mentioning my name. Or I've been told personally, I know your sources, your stories are good, but I can't run your stories because of the backlash from the audience that I have, because they don't like you. So it's, you know, it's just dealing with a lot of, you know, just ridiculous nonsense like that. You know, you don't kiss someone's ass and you tell it like it is. Dave Meltzer once apologized to me in a DM. I don't think a lot of people realize that. But in the very beginning, Dave Meltzer actually DM'd me an apology for not crediting me in the Observer in one of his stories. It's the only time he's ever done that. And that was a good thing to do. But ever since then, he's done the opposite. He's continued to steal my work, and, you know, he blocked me on social media, but it's very clear he's following my work. He spends his time on the, what they call the board on the F4W website for subscribers, you know, talking about me and even others as well in the journalism industry. It's very odd. I mean, this guy is 60 years old, and he'll be, you know, talking negatively about me or discrediting me on his paywall. It's just very odd behavior. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of Dave Meltzer at all. I was very indifferent to him before, had no problem with him. But, you know, I'm certainly at the point now where, you know, I've known that he's completely dishonest, and he occasionally makes shit up, and, I just think he's completely discredited himself in a lot of ways. So I'm not a fan at all. I'm sure he's not a fan of me at all. And so that's pretty much where we are.
Do you think he's looking at his replacement at this point? I mean, you have so many different, I don't even know if I can call them wrestling news sites. That's how they identify themselves. But, it's more like satire sites, if anything, where they just repost anything Meltzer has to say. And it's funny that you bring up 2019, because what I started to notice is the tide shift where the name Brad Shepard was just all over the place. Yeah. So many people were sourcing you and reposting things that you said. I mean, entire articles and what have you, which, thank goodness they're crediting you, but obviously they realized that whatever information you were putting out is going to get them some clicks, so they were using you. Do you think somebody like Meltzer sees the tide shifting here, and it's like, well, this guy he's the new guy, so to speak? Maybe that's the source of this frustration that he seems to be carrying with you?
That could be some of the frustration. I mean, I think Dave is essentially an egomaniac or a narcissist. So, I think he's hell-bent on keeping a spot and doing whatever that takes, whether it's lying or trying to discredit me to anyone possible, and he certainly tries to do that, among others. But yeah, he's got to be feeling personally, he's got to be seeing it, because I'm seeing it, right? The talk, the attention is probably more on me than anyone else in media when it comes to professional wrestling this year. And so maybe that's frustrating for him. I know there's a full-time job. Like some people, it's their full-time job to go out of the way to talk negatively about me and try to discredit me on wrestling Twitter. So it's a very real thing. Like they're worried about their spot, and hey, I don't want their spot, so it's not anything for them to be worried about. But they don't like the idea that I'm breaking big stories that they're clueless about.
Sure. You said that in a very nice manner. Not only do they not like the idea, they despise the idea, and I would even go so far as to say that they're using what I call burner accounts, these fake accounts that, maybe they have 2 or 3 followers. They were just created a week ago, and it seems like their sole mission is to say something negative about someone, in this case you, to try to discredit you and what have you.
Yeah, for sure.
It's clear that these are folks who have an axe to grind and trying to hide their identity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. So that's a big thing. That's like something I deal with daily. There's one troll who'll create a new username, like almost every day, and it's like just to talk about me having no sources, not being a real journalist. But it's stuff like that, like every single day that they spend their energy on. And you obviously know that there's people in the industry behind it, right? And it's one of those things. I mean, they go as far as making up tweets, like creating fake tweets, which anybody can do. There's apps for it. It's not hard to do. They'll screenshot a fake tweet after creating it, and then they'll say, "Oh, Brad Shepard said this." There's been a Facebook account recently that's been posting a lot of fake news saying that I said something, which I never obviously did. But, people may read it and think, oh, man, Brad Shepard really said this. So I deal with like a lot of that sort of noise and confusion and just trying to help people understand what I said and what I did. And it's always best to get it from the horse's mouth. I'm not hard to find or, to talk to. So, but it's a very interesting thing.
Speaking of interesting thing, I mean, over the past year, we finally have what could very well be someday, I don't think they're there yet, but someday, a true challenger to the WWE. And I'm talking about All Elite Wrestling. What's your general take in regard to, their first year there? And they're a startup, so they've had some growing pains for sure. But overall, what's Brad Shepard's take on this new kid on the block, All Elite Wrestling, in their first year?
I mean, there are some things I do like, and there's definitely some things I don't. I mean, when you talk a business model, I really would question what they're doing, just because right now they have decided to essentially cater to the current audience they have, right? I mean, they've been pretty clear about that, they're not writing for the casual fan, the dormant fan. They're writing for their current audience. That's who they're focused on appeasing. And that's a really bad idea when you're trying to grow your show. You want advertisers, you want to increase your ratings. Obviously, you want to stay on network TV. They've got a great platform there. But you have to show the success of your ratings. And granted, it's a successful show for the network they're on, but, at the end of the day, you can't remain stale. You have to always move forward, and you're not going to do that when you've got the same audience. You already have that audience. How about getting a new audience? So I just think from a business model standpoint, that's a big mistake. And another thing would be how they're so opposite of reactionary. So they made it pretty clear, too, they weren't going to be reactionary, obviously, because they're on the same time as NXT. And granted, you don't want to do everything reactionary, but I think there's a happy medium where, man, there's going to be some times where you should probably change some stuff up on short notice based on what happens with NXT, and that's okay. Keeping yourself flexible to do something like that is a good thing. So, just from a business standpoint, a couple of those things I do find questionable. They do have a base audience. It's that hardcore wrestling audience that loves indie wrestling and ROH and New Japan and those type of things. And so they have them already. But, creatively and looking at the roster, man, Chris Jericho is phenomenal. Yes, he looks like your next door neighbor's drunk uncle, but the guy is super entertaining. And being able to do something unscripted, he's been a highlight of the show for me, for sure, maybe the highlight. And, Cody's been pretty good, although here recently the stuff they've been doing I haven't been a huge fan of. So, there are some people that are doing good things, but I look at that roster and it's a lot of nobodies. It's a lot of indie darlings. It's a lot of guys who don't look like professional wrestlers to me. And not everybody needs to be, 6'2", 6'4", 240 pounds, 260 pounds, whatever the case is. But you can't have most of your roster looking like they could wrestle on 185 Live. So, and I think that's part of the problem they have is a lot of their guys are just so small. You look at Marco Stunt, and not only is he wrestling, but he's actually like bigger guys are selling for his offense. And that guy is what, 5 foot tall or less and 20 pounds, maybe? So I just don't get that kind of a thing. You look at Jungle Boy, who I want to like. I mean, I liked his father in acting, so there's a connection there. I want to like him, but he's another guy who's super, super tiny. He's 160 pounds. Yeah, soaking wet. So they've got a lot of that type of stuff, and they had this very indie style. It's really the Young Buck style, which I am not a fan of at all. Again, they have some people that don't do that. You look at a Cody Rhodes match. I thought his match with Dustin was phenomenal. But then you have the opposite spectrum of that and the Young Bucks, and, they're just doing these mindless, stupid-ass spots. The match has no psychology. It's just spot after spot after spot with no selling and 20 super kicks. And, so that's not really for me. And I don't think that's for a casual or dormant audience either. Right, it's that kind of hardcore fan base that loves that today, but it's really for not many other type of fans. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess. It's a mixed bag for me, but if they don't change their business model, I don't think they're really going to grow their fan base.
It's funny that you say that because I was hanging out with my mother and my sister, and it was on a Wednesday night, so I was flipping back and forth on the two shows, and you had the main event in NXT. Keith Lee, Ciampa, and Finn Balor. That was the main event, that triple threat match, right?
Yeah.
And then you have on AEW Dynamite, it was the Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros, I think it was. Whatever the hell that tables match was that they had. So just complete flippy mania, no psychology, just flips and dips all day long. No tags, obviously, because why would you tag in any kind of tag match? That doesn't make any sense these days, I guess. I don't know. But then you have a guy like Keith Lee, who's just this massive dude.
Yeah.
And then you have Balor, who has, he has a 50-pack with those abs of his. And then Ciampa with that crazy beard of his. She kept calling him Grandpa. She's like, wow, Grandpa has muscles. And my mother's not a wrestling fan.
Right.
She doesn't watch wrestling on a regular basis. She legitimately is somebody who would be flipping channels, and if she sees something that she's interested in, she might stick around for a little while. NXT was showing something that caught her eye. She wanted to see what Keith Lee was going to do with these smaller guys. AEW, she didn't understand it. She couldn't get it. Didn't make any sense to her. And that really made me take a step back and think about it. And it's like, and damn it. And these guys have the audacity to say that they're not trying to attract the casual fan. They're going to stick to their fan base. Well, yeah, you're doing that, but unfortunately it ain't working. So I think you're a little spot on there, Brad, with what you just said there, where you're on a network and the goal is to make money. You want to attract as many people as possible. This whole concept that you're going to stick to your base, which is, mostly neckbeards who may or may not have ever had a relationship with the opposite sex. I mean, how are you going to sustain your business if that's all you're trying to market to?
It's a great point. I mean, and that's what I try to do, when I talk about wrestling on my Twitter, @TheBradShepard, cheap plug. I try to give the perspective of not just the hardcore wrestling fan in the wrestling bubble, because we see so much of that on social media. But I try to give a different perspective so that fans are seeing outside of the echo chamber opinions. I try to give them that other aspect, that, guy on the recliner flipping the channels who comes across it, or, maybe a dormant fan who hasn't watched in 20 years. I try to give that other perspective as well, so they, it's like, sure, are there some things in New Japan Pro Wrestling that I like? Yes. Is that something that's going to attract most casual or dormant pro wrestling fans in the United States? Oh, absolutely not. It's a very specific niche audience. So I just try to be honest about that, and I try to give that other perspective that really they're not getting from anybody else in media. They're getting a complete fanboy in the bubble perspective, and it's so important that they have another perspective.
If anyone listening right now, they want to check out some of your stuff, they want to listen to your podcast, I know you got a big episode coming up this week. Throw it all out there. What's the best way folks can get more Brad Shepard in their life?
Yeah, probably the best way is follow me on Twitter @TheBradShepard. It's SHEPARD. You can find a lot of my information there on my Twitter profile as far as our Oh You Didn't Know Wrestling Show Patreon, our Oh You Didn't Know Wrestling Show podcast that comes out every Thursday on iHeartRadio, iTunes, pretty much every platform you can think of. I've lost count. So those are a couple of really cool ways to follow what I do. Obviously, ProSportsExtra.com. My articles there are always interesting, and that's pretty much it. There's a lot of different ways to get a hold of me and follow my work. So, but probably the best thing is my Twitter account.
Before I let you go, Brad, let me ask you one more question, and at least for me personally, it's an important one. We can talk about pro wrestling and all this great stuff, this sports entertainment that gets us all excited, this fantasy world, so to speak, that, I'm sure somebody like yourself, you grew up watching this stuff, and that's probably the reason why you dedicate so much time and effort into shining a light on the business itself through your articles and your podcast and what have you. One of the things that I always wonder about is the humanity of a lot of this stuff. You have people who are threatening your life, who are cussing you out, who have dedicated significant portions of their own personal time to try to affect you as negatively as possible. Does your family know that you get that kind of heat
it may bother my wife. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not a 40-year-old virgin. I actually have a family. But yet, I think that the funny story is, so obviously my wife is aware of my work in general, but she's not a wrestling fan. She doesn't keep up with this kind of a thing. But, I think she made the mistake once of Googling my name, and she came across something on Reddit. And that may have been the last time that she Googled my name. So yeah, I mean, she's aware, obviously, to a degree, and I don't blame her for not wanting to go too deep into the rabbit hole, but, it doesn't bother me. Again, you have to have thick skin to do what I do, and, sticks and stones, whatever. So, but yeah, people are aware. I sometimes share it with my brother and get a good laugh out of it. So, again, I find it humorous. For the most part, I really do. I find it funny, because again, at the end of the day, even if you hate me, you're really kind of doing my job. You're spreading my brand, in me personally, my name, what I do to your followers. So, when Anaya Jax is tweeting out that I need to find a new source because she's not returning in the first quarter of 2020, like I reported, in April of last year, she's doing me a favor. She has like 500,000 followers, right? So I wish she would do that more. And at the end of the day, she's going to be proven wrong. But, and we'll deal with that. But she is doing me a favor. So every time, people like that, if they have 500 followers or they have 500,000 followers, they're doing me a favor in a lot of ways. So I don't mind. It's kind of that, any publicity is good publicity mindset. And maybe there's a certain point where that's not true. Like if you're, someone in Hollywood, for example, that's not always the case. But for me, where I'm at, it's always the case. I love that. That's what I want because they're doing my job for me. So it never bothers me. And a lot of times I find it funny. I'm not a guy who takes myself very seriously. And a lot of times, like, obviously I realize, like, wrestling is not very serious. So it's just not a big deal. And people get so triggered by the stupidest little things that are so irrelevant in life. And maybe that comes from the fact that they're just not very happy in their lives. I don't know. But, when you have a happy, fulfilling life, something like this, an opinion on who's getting a push or, what I like, not being a big women's wrestling fan, that really is not something that should bother anybody at all. But it does, as we clearly see. So, that's something I've had to adjust to as well, really having this platform and seeing how literally anything I tweet becomes a topic of conversation. And even people who have me blocked or don't like me, I'll see, like, they have my tweet screenshotted and they're clearly talking about it. So I make a discussion, I'm a topic of discussion just by tweeting something, so there's a lot of impact to that. And again, I find it really silly, but it's something I've come to really understand. And so I try to be, I guess, more understanding of that when I tweet something. Be a thought leader. Tweet out something that's going to get people talking. Those type of things. And also try not to take myself too seriously. But yeah, I do find a lot of it humorous. It doesn't bother me. At the end of the day, it's just wrestling. Who really cares?
That will probably go down as the most controversial interview that has ever happened on the Duke Loves Rasslin podcast. I told you last week, folks, in the year 2020, I'm going to be like Biggie Smalls. Kick in the door, okay? This whole concept of if somebody says something that you don't agree with, suddenly that means that you have to cancel them. You can't talk to them. You can't associate with them in any way. I don't subscribe to that. And I'm going to tell you something about Brad Shepard. A couple things. Number one, I don't agree with everything that he says, but I also don't disagree with everything he says. And that's no different from anybody else that I know, by the way. So that's number one. But number two, when I take a look at some of the neckbeards and the humanoids who make it their business day in and day out to give that guy a hard time, to complain and threaten and cuss and carry on. I notice that there's some overlap whenever I say anything about AEW. It's the same neckbeards and humanoids that are talking nonsense to me, that are sending me threats, that are talking trash to me. And what I've found, I had like a epiphany. If somebody is being given a hard time by a particular population of people who are also giving you a hard time, then that somebody's probably not so bad. Now, does this mean that me and Brad Shepard are going to be best friends forever or something like that? Of course not. Of course not. But I'll tell you what it does mean. I respect the fact that the man doesn't run, doesn't duck, doesn't hide. He says what he says, and it is what it is. A lot of you folks are still upset with him over that Sasha Banks thing. And again, I think that he articulated it well. You're kind of blaming him for things that other folks have said, Ryan Satin in particular. Kind of lumping the two of them in together, which doesn't make any sense. And Shepard brought up a good point. I mean, you report on something, and it's a moving target. Things develop, they change, and you keep the reporting going. That's the way it goes, man. So, whatever. You know, definitely send me your messages, send me your emails, good, bad, or indifferent. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to put the content out there. I will interview anybody, and I will ask them direct questions, and we'll see how it all shakes out. I mean, it's funny because a lot of you lost your ever-loving mind last week when I had Obi Tynes on the show. You know, the guy that's been blackballed in wrestling, or at least there's been a major attempt. Don't book him. Don't book him. All because he says he doesn't agree with transgender athletes competing, especially when it relates to transgendered women competing against non-transgendered women. I don't agree with OB, which we made that very clear last week on the show, but that doesn't mean that the man is not entitled to expressing his point of view. And it doesn't mean that we need to just shut him down, cancel him, don't book him anywhere, get rid of him, tar and feather him, just because he has a view on something. You've gone too far, every single one of you. Check out Brad Shepard's Twitter account just to see it. You've gone too far. Somebody doesn't agree with you, and it's like the end of the world. You're having a conniption about it. Let me tell you something. Debate for me is like a pickup game of basketball. You know what I'm talking about. You got the basketball court down the street. You show up to the court. Doesn't matter who's playing. You join in, and whatever happens. Maybe you play a game of 21. Who knows, right? Game of horse, whatever. Full court, half court's all the same. You don't hate the person if you win or if you lose. It's sport. That's all it is. That's what debate is to me. It's like playing a game of chess. I don't hate you if you beat me or if I beat you or if it's a stalemate. Who cares? It's just enjoyable to compete. And I think a lot of you have this weird, I'm just going to say it. Some of you are just social outcasts. And it's manifested in a manner where you finally found a community of other social outcasts. And you've become the oppressed that has turned into the oppressor. When you run across people who aren't afraid of your opinion, who aren't afraid to tell you that you don't make any damn sense, who aren't afraid to say that the person that you love is not so great, you can't handle it. You shut down. And then you lash out. I think all elite wrestling, for the most part, is poorly managed. As a business, they market things and then they don't deliver on those things. It's poorly managed. And on the flip side, I think the WWE is very well managed. And I think their content is not always very good. In fact, half the time it's pretty terrible, but they manage their business correctly. They deliver on what they market for the most part. And the end result is not always very good. But at least they gave you what they told you they were going to give you for the most part. There are exceptions, but for the most part. That's bare bones stuff, man. So if All Elite Wrestling can't even give you the bare bones stuff, what the heck? We can't even get past that point. I'm still holding them accountable for what they claim they're gonna do. But I'm a bad guy for saying that stuff, right? Get out of here. Bunch of social outcasts who can't handle somebody having a different opinion than you have. It's tremendous to see. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to clue you guys in on something. I am thoroughly entertained by each and every one of you who can't handle somebody telling you that you don't make sense, that your opinion is not necessarily a fact, that the people that you look up to and that you love and you follow and you believe in aren't so great. I get a kick out of it to see you have a meltdown over somebody telling you that stuff. Because I think it's foolish. Not everybody has to agree with you, and they're not going to. And if you can't coexist with people who disagree with you, something's wrong. That's my opinion. Something's wrong. Who the hell can go through life only interacting and only existing with people who agree with them? How does that even work? I don't get it. I don't get it. But I appreciate people like Brad Shepard for stoking conversation and challenging the way that we look at things and the way that we think. And again, hey, does he get everything right? Hell no. Not even close. But he doesn't get everything wrong either. And you keep talking about it. You keep going back for more. Me too. So, it's fun. Interesting stuff, man. You know, it's crazy because I'm taking a look at this thing, and you know, I'm a big women's wrestling fan. That's one thing me and Brad don't agree with, by the way. He's not necessarily a big fan of women's wrestling, and I'm a huge fan of women's wrestling. But it doesn't mean that I want to threaten to pile drive the guy next time I see. First of all, I can't pick him up. He's a big guy. Can't pick him up. But beyond that, we can have a difference of opinion on that. But it's interesting. Something just happened. Breaking news. Mercedes Martinez, legitimately one of the top wrestlers in the world. She's fantastic. She's amazing. She's been kicking butt all over the place for a long time. She's helped do training seminars and things for a lot of people who you may know of and people who you're definitely going to know about. She's just well respected, man. Fantastic person. Fantastic wrestler. She just signed with the WWE. And it got me to thinking. Imagine you are AEW. And you have a women's division that's been poorly booked. To the point where you've admitted it. And the person who allegedly is responsible, Kenny Omega, has had to admit that there have been some major mistakes, and he promises that it's going to get better, whatever that means. Haven't seen it yet, by the way. You have a talent like Mercedes Martinez on the open market, and you don't do everything in your power to sign that person? You mean to tell me that Tony Khan couldn't go to daddy and scrape together enough pennies to sign Mercedes Martinez? But Rio is your champion? And then you have the audacity to say that the reason why the women's division has been executed so poorly is because of the lack of availability of the stars? But Mercedes Martinez is on the open market. She's available, right? You've used her a couple of times. Poorly, by the way. A locker room leader. Well respected. Person who can kick butt in the ring. And you could not scrape together enough pennies to sign her? You allow the WWE to get her? You're not serious. You're not serious. I'm sorry. You're not serious. Can't take you seriously. I just have to laugh at you. Because you keep telling me that it's going to improve and things are going to get better. And listen, I give you credit. Big Swole was huge. I like Chris Statlander. She's fantastic as well. I think the Sheeta girl, she's good as well. But my goodness, Rio is champion. You still got Nyla Rose losing matches. My goodness. Speaking of WWE, what do they have? One women's match the other day on Raw? Complete embarrassment. Disrespectful, disgusting. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. And Paul Heyman, I'm talking to you directly, and also you, Triple H, Stephanie McMahon, Vince McMahon. I'm talking to all of you. George, your co-president, George. Where's this equal opportunity crap that you guys keep preaching? Why do we have one women's match on a 3-hour program? It's 2020. No excuse for it. And I'm going to tell you right now, WWE, you got Asuka? You just signed Mercedes Martinez. You got Ember Moon, who should be coming back soon. Becky Lynch and Charlotte and Sasha. Jesus, Alexa Bliss. Natty, who legitimately is just class personified. I got to wonder, with this collection of talent that you have, Ito Shirai, Kairi Sane, Shayna Baszler, Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, Ginny, with this collection of talent that you currently have, these women are legitimately the top wrestlers that have come along in Jesus, the past 20 years, right? Like we haven't seen women's talent this good since the old All Japan Pro Wrestling days, right? Why the hell are you collecting all of this fantastic talent and then you turn around and only have one women's match on a 3-hour program? How does that work? You have the best women in the world for the most part. There is not a single roster in all of pro wrestling that's stronger than the WWE women's roster. It doesn't exist. And I would venture to say that it never existed anywhere else. Not for a major promotion. You got one women's match on a 3-hour program. You all ought to be ashamed of yourself, and I'm disappointed in all of you. Disgusting. We cannot allow it to happen, folks. There's no excuse for it. It just comes down to poor decision making on the part of who's in charge, and quite frankly, it's disrespectful. It's a lack of commitment. What the hell is the point of having all these fantastic people on the roster if you're not going to utilize them? Do I really need to see some of these garbage matches that you put on instead, and these skits and all this other garbage that you're doing when you could have had more women's content? Come on. And some of you would disagree with me. A lot of you will talk that, well, the girls' matches, they're women, first of all. They're not girls, they're women. But, well, we don't need to have equal matches for women, and we don't need to have multiple women's matches. Well, why not? There's no excuse not to have it, especially when you have that collection of talent. Now, listen, if you were to make that argument for AEW, it's debatable. Even though I think they have a talented women's roster in general, I just think that they're being poorly utilized. But if you want to make the argument that because they're so little utilized, you can't even put on multiple women's matches on their television show because it may not be executed well because they don't put any kind of legitimate support behind those women. That's an argument. I'm going to argue against it, but it's an argument. There's nothing to argue with the WWE. These are the best, most talented, ready to go women's roster that you've ever seen. And you got a 3-hour program and you're not utilizing them. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm talking to you directly, Stephanie McMahon, you in particular ought to be ashamed of yourself. Because you know better. My expectations for everybody else in there are pretty low. I don't really think too highly of them, to be honest with you, as it relates to what's going on with women, because there's too many starts and stops. But you know better. So for you to ever allow a 3-hour program to happen any week with only one women's match, I'm looking at you and I'm disappointed in you the most, because you should never allow it to happen. You are a strong, powerful, imposing, serious business person. You cannot allow the boys club, the good old boys club, to continue to do what they're doing. Use your voice. And don't accept this kind of garbage going forward, because you're going to be held accountable. It's on you. And some of you are going to say, well, how can you put it all on Stephanie? Well, why can't I put it all on Stephanie? You mean to tell me if Stephanie McMahon says this ain't happening anymore, we're going the other way? Who the hell's going to stop her? You think Vince is going to say, no, Stephanie, we're going to do it my way, only one women's match? No, it doesn't work like that. Stop it. Doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. But this is what happens when the good old boys network, they assemble in a manner, and they only put a couple of women here and there, and then they drown them out. Because I don't believe that Stephanie McMahon thinks it's acceptable to only have one women's match on a 3-hour program. And don't tell me, well, we got other plans and we're going to make good on NXT and we're going to make good on SmackDown. Those are separate programs. Don't give me that crap. Don't give me that crap. You got 3 hours of TV and you can only fit one women's match, but yet you give us another Rusev and Lana and Bobby Lashley wedding segment, which I like, by the way. I enjoy that stuff. But golly, did we really need it again? You could have skipped a week on that. I'm going to tell you right now, do not ruin Mercedes Martinez. Don't do it. Don't ruin her. You'll never hear the end of it if you do. I want to thank Brad Shepard, good guy, coming on the show. Listen, Brad, you're going to get me shut down. Like I said, they're going to call FBI, CIA, Space Force. They're going to have me shut down for having you on the show. Because how dare I have somebody on the show who has thoughts and reports on things in a manner that the humanoids just can't seem to function with. Gives them the shakes. Makes their Twitter fingers tingle. Whatever. But we're not going to stop, folks. You know, hey, listen, join me next week. It's going to be more of this. We're going to keep this going. Kick in the door 2020. That's what we're doing here. The Biggie Smalls, baby. That's what it's all about, right? All these folks that you can't handle hearing from, gives you the shakes, makes you shut down because your humanoid social outcast self, for some reason in your fantasy world, in your mind, has convinced yourself that you can't hear from anyone who is in an echo chamber. Well, guess what? This is the anti-echo chamber here, folks. If you disagree with me on anything, I want you on the show. Because I'm tired of, I can hear my own voice. I don't need to hear anybody else agree with me. I already agree with myself. Let's hear some disagreement. Why not? Damn right. All right. Until next week, folks, be kind to yourselves. Be kind to others. Take it away, Tony Schiavone.
Mr. Tony Schiavone, and we're desperately out of time on Duke Loves Wrestling.